Well, the stabbing of 5 people in Ireland has inflamed dissatisfaction amongst the nation over rapidly increasing immigration. But police chiefs blamed rioting in Dublin city centre last week on a, quote, lunatic hooligan faction driven by a far-right ideology, end of quote. Joining us now to discuss this is author Michael Walsh. Michael, great to see you. So what's happening there in Ireland? So we had the stabbing, and it's apparently far-right if you in any way try to blame the riots that then followed on the questions surrounding immigration. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, everything in Ireland is far-right that is not in lockstep agreement with the government media complex in Ireland. Ireland has a nominal two-party system, which goes back to the treaty that you may recall from watching movies about Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera, which parties split over the treaty that eventually won partial independence from Britain. So they're called Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. Effectively, they're the uniparty now. They are both in favor of what the government is in favor of. And they have formed a coalition government after the last election, since neither one of them could get a majority. And they are presently in a coalition government with a very tiny party called the Green Party, which, curiously enough, all of the major government ministries, including the environment, and has elements of the immigration in it as well. So it's a powder keg. I live on the west coast of Ireland in a house where my great-grandmother was born. I've restored it and brought property up and moved my family to Ireland. I have an Irish son-in-law. I have 2 Irish grandchildren and a third on the way, and I'm looking forward to seeing them very soon. But that's one version of immigration. The other version is the untrammeled. Everyone can come in and is entitled to the most generous benefits in the European Union, just on their say-so. They arrive with no passports, no papers, no nothing, and immediately demand housing, etc. Predominantly among them, although not the source of this current trouble, are the Ukrainians, who have been welcomed with open arms, even though, as I pointed out from time to time, that by welcoming Ukrainian men into Ireland, you are effectively supporting Putin, because those men are subject to the draft back home in the Ukraine. We haven't quite thought this whole thing through. But what happened in the stabbing of the day, and it's personal to me. I have 2, as I mentioned, 2 grandchildren, a third on the way, and my elder granddaughter goes to school in Dublin. She's a great schooler, like the victims of this particular stabbing. That was just the thing that set the simmering powder keg off. And the government has chosen to deal with it by basically cracking down on everyone who is opposed to immigration, as the term is understood in the political sense, and calling them far right, and asking for hate speech crimes, new laws. And it's a mess.
Michael, I saw Conor McGregor, the famous Irish UFC fighter, come out strongly. I think police are now investigating to see whether some of his statements breached hate laws, but he has been very, very outspoken about explaining where this anger comes from, and it's not just some far-right hooligan element. So I'm interested to see how he has suddenly become the voice of disaffected people. At the top of the show, we played a compilation of Irish politicians standing up in Parliament and just making the most absurd anti-white comments. Is there a self-loathing in Ireland? The people are voting for this. Is there a crisis in identity where they hate who they are?
Well, as I used to joke with my friend James, who's sitting next to you during the Australian lockdown, once a penal colony, always a penal colony, as far as Australia. And Ireland, once a slave state of the British, always a slave state. And in this case, we substituted 700 years of slavery under England for a few years, a few decades of freedom, and then rushed back into the embrace of new slavers. They live in Belgium, of all places. Who had Ireland gets taken over by Brussels on their bingo card. And Irish politicians now are wholly employed by the European Union. So they don't care what the Irish people think. They answer, and in their lights, understandably, to the EU and Belgium, and they're constantly citing EU laws over Irish sovereignty.
Wow.
Many years ago, I was flying back to Ireland, and a woman, Irish woman next to me, said to me at that point, this was in the 90s, "I feel like we're losing my country." And I said, "What do you mean feel like? You already lost it. The minute you joined the European Union, you lost your sovereignty."
100%.
And
James.
that's what happened. All of this comes from that.
And so is that where then, I mean, I feel sort of like with Ireland, it feels like kind of the test case for a lot of other countries right now. And that if you look at this law that they're pushing through on hate speech, where essentially, you know, memes on your phone, the cops can look at your phone and say, hey, that's a hateful meme. You know, we don't like that. And you could wind up literally banged up for it. And I feel like this is almost the test model that they're trying it out in sort of a small country like Ireland to run it out in bigger jurisdictions, including, of course, Australia. Tell us about this hate speech law and how that would actually wind up working.
Well, the hate speech law has been proposed now for a few months. It's been set aside, except that the government has used this protest by, quote, far-right hooligans in response to the stabbing of a little girl by what appears to have been an Algerian immigrant who had been ordered deported, oddly enough, and then was rescued probably by the NGOs who are the do-gooder external forces all over Ireland. They're quite powerful, and they eventually got him citizenship. Well, people were finally just completely fed up with this. But to crack down on the people, remember, the people don't matter. They're animals on a farm, and Ireland is viewed by the EU as a kind of backwater with a lot of empty space, because after all, the Brits emptied us out from 8 million to 4 million people during the famine. But, you know, as John Cleese says in Fawlty Towers, just don't mention the war. So we don't mention the famine. But there's a lot of space in Ireland. It's being used. I think you're absolutely right, James. It's being used as a test case in order to see how far they can push a country that doesn't really have a lot of pushback in it. So many of the Irish, like me and my family, and millions of us in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada, in the United States, are immigrants not by choice, but of necessity during the 19th century, particularly. And so Ireland is really defenseless, and because it doesn't have a real sense of its own nationhood other than its cultural Irishness, it's finding it hard to fight back. And also, Rita mentioned this, the politicians now have decided to adopt American terminology. That is, you're either white or you're not.
Exactly.
White
Exactly.
people, and not is good. So we literally have these discussions going on in Ireland where people say, why aren't there more black faces in, you know, television shows about 15th century Ireland?
Mike,
there weren't any. They look at you like you're crazy.
Exactly. Michael Walsh, great to chat to you. Sorry, I got to cut you off there. Chat to you for hours. Really great stuff. Thank you so much.